Bisho. I am the Outreach and Inclusion Officer of the Minneapolis DFL. And I want to welcome you all and thank you all. Thank all the volunteers and the community groups who helped put this together. I also want to remind everyone that the time to register for the 2021 caucus is from now until April 30th. You can register at minneapolisdfl.org. It only takes 10 minutes of your time. If you haven't already, you have 6 more days. And if you have already and you want to change your selections, you can re-register in that time. So let's get started so we can hear from the candidates. And with that, I'll pass it to Brianna, who will explain the rules and format.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Brianna Rosalie, and I'm the Vice Chair for the Minneapolis DFL. Thanks for spending your Saturday morning with us. I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. We do have a total of 8 questions prepared for the candidates, but this is time permitting, so we'll get through as many as we can in the next hour and a half. Each candidate will be asked the same questions, and we're just going to rotate the order in which the candidates answer. I will ask that you please remember this is not a debate, it's a forum, so we will not be name calling other candidates and there won't be rebuttals. Please be respectful of each other and don't interrupt or speak over anyone. The questions will be coming from local organizations on the topics of public safety, housing, sustainability, arts and culture, and economic development and labor. It's important to note that these submitted questions do not imply an organization's endorsement of any candidate. We will begin with an opening statement from each of you for 90 seconds. Each candidate will have then 2 minutes to answer each question before we move on to the next candidate's answer. And then we'll end with a 90-second closing statement for each candidate. I will let you know when your time has expired and call the next speaker. There is a timer in the gallery box to help you keep track of the time. We have a lot of important topics to get to, so let's just jump right in. And we will start with Sheila Nijad.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sheila Nijad. I use she, her pronouns. I've been a community organizer and policy analyst for over a decade. My motto is from the streets to the spreadsheets. Last week and last summer, I stood with community on the ground as a medic and organizer. In my work as a policy analyst, I've trained hundreds of people on how to get involved in the city budget process. I am mixed race, a renter, queer woman, and daughter of an immigrant. I moved to Minneapolis 12 years ago, where I got my master's degree at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And in the years since, I've been a policy researcher, restaurant worker, union member, and board president of the Lyndale Neighborhood Association. I've been running campaigns for safety beyond policing at City Hall for years. Through my work with Reclaim the Block, I helped move millions of dollars to create the Office of Violence Prevention and alternatives to policing like mobile mental health teams. As mayor, I will use my knowledge and community connections to cultivate real safety solutions that address the core causes of violence and harm and build racial justice. The people of Minneapolis are powerful, resilient, and creative. And it's time for our elected officials to catch up. And that's why I'm asking for your support today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. And next we'll hear from Kate Knuth.
Thank you. I'm Kate Knuth, and I appreciate you all tuning in to hear more from us today. I'm a mom, I'm a climate strategist, I'm a small business owner, a 3-term state representative, and I'm running for mayor because we need leadership to help us turn this historic moment into a real turning point toward a more just future. My commitment to community is really rooted in my family. My dad was a feminist, an environmentalist, a public servant. My mom, a public school educator. They were the ones who served on a church board and organized a neighborhood picnic. And our family, being deeply rooted in community, is essential to a good life. And right now, our community is really fractured. Police violence rooted in racial injustice has turned these fractures into huge divides. And I can never fully understand the anger and grief of Black and brown people in our community right now, but I do know what it's like to lose a loved one at the hands of police. In 2008, my cousin Mark was in a single car accident, and State Patrol showed up to help, and they tased him, and he died on the way to the hospital. I got the call about 10:30, and I joined my family at the hospital, but it wasn't until the next day that we actually found out he was tased. We heard that from the coroner. In the days after, we struggled to get information. We struggled with how his drug use was portrayed to undermine what a kind and good-hearted person he was. So I know what it's like for government to fail. I also know what it's, as a white woman, I don't fully understand how Black and brown neighbors in our city feel this. And I am deeply committed to building the community that will make a safe, just, and resilient Minneapolis.
Thank you, Kate. Next, we will hear from Phil Sturm.
Hello, I'm Phil Sturm. I'm running for mayor as a working class veteran, volunteer, and servant of the city. I have lived here for 18 years, and right now it seems like City Hall is an island in the midst of a drowning city. I have served on the 9/11 911 MPD work group, which helped develop alternative responses to mental health calls and for taking reports. And I have also in my past served as a volunteer Hennepin County Special Deputy, learning about community service, emergency management, and opioid crisis response. I am running to bring a down-to-earth voice to our government, to check our out-of-control bureaucracy, and drive accountability at every level of government. As essential workers, we need a voice and a seat at the table. I think elected officials should be more than a rubber stamp for what government bureaucrats want to do. I'm also running because I believe that the First Amendment does not have a curfew. I want to thank our community in this town for their near infinite grace and patience in the face of continual abuse, brutality, and arrogance. I have served all over the world in many different situations, and our government should be thanking their lucky stars that our community is so exceedingly long suffering. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jacob Fry?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacob Fry, and I'm the mayor of Minneapolis. And thank you so much to the DFL community groups and organizers that have helped put this forum on. It is greatly appreciated. And thank you, everyone, for joining here today. Minneapolis right now is at the center of a national racial reckoning. George Floyd's murder at the hands of police has been recognized by the court as just that, murder. But that verdict is the most basic measure of accountability that can be afforded to the Black community, one that's been historically denied. And these cycles of tragedy and trauma, they aren't going to interrupt themselves. So we've been doing the work. Our administration has invested more than any in city history to build inclusive community safety systems and support violence prevention. We've implemented progressive policies that promote accountability and transparency in the police department and worked alongside community to rebuild trust. But we shortchange this conversation if we limit it to community safety and policing. This is about white supremacy and systems that protect the status quo and preclude change. We've done big things over the last 3 years, from record-setting investments in affordable housing production and preservation to building new programs like Stable Homes, Stable Schools, which has effectively served thousands of public school children, over 90% of whom are BIPOC, and the designed intentional vehicles like cultural districts and the Commercial Property Development Fund for BIPOC neighborhoods. We've also navigated unprecedented challenges together. We've taken up difficult conversations and done hard work, but we're only getting started. We need principled leadership, officials willing to take tough positions and collaborate to realize Minneapolis's potential. That's what we're offering and what we hope you'll join us in supporting.
Thank you, Jacob. And AJ Awad?
Thank you. Hello, aloha, hola, and assalamu alaikum to everybody. My name is AJ Alwyn. I'm a ADR specialist, a mediator. I'm a current co-executive director at Neighborhood Association in Cedar Riverside, as well as vice chair for the University District Alliance, which is the neighborhood association for the Twin Cities U of M campus. I am excited, honestly, to seek this local DFL endorsement. And I truly believe that the Minneapolis DFL can be the only person that can, or the only entity that can unify all of us on this left, and honestly begin the work of creating new promises and really a new vision for this great city. However, we really need a mayoral candidate this year that has the leadership, neighborhood partners, and ultimately the compassion and understanding to bring real and lasting change to the city. I believe that I am a candidate that can deliver on that, and I hope that the Minneapolis DFL will support me on this endeavor. And if they do, I'm pretty confident we can and we will build new bridges between communities and ultimately end and eliminate the racial, economic, and neighborhood disparities that challenge this great city. So thank you with that.
And thank you, AJ. All right, and just before we get started, I wanted to mention that all candidates who have filed for endorsement from the DFL were invited to this forum. So we're really happy we have the 5 of you. I know that there were a couple others that also unfortunately are not able to be with us today. So I just did want to mention everyone was invited. I'm now going to turn this over to Zainab and we'll get started on the questions.
Cool. Thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Zainab Mohammed. I am an organizer, an activist, and a resident of Minneapolis, and I'm excited to be here with all of you and learn about your platform, including with the community. So I will get started with the first question, and it's, do you support a rent control policy, and what are the details you would want to see implemented? And this question is from Inquilinxs Unidxs Por Justicia. The first person that's answering is Kate Knuth.
Thank you, Zainab. I do support a charter change for rent stabilization because I think we need to open up the conversation and take real significant steps to make sure renters can stay in their homes. And we need to make sure we're not creating unintended consequences that would push small landlords out of the city. So I think we need to design this policy to meet both of those really important needs. Taking out a step further, we're in a housing crisis and housing is a right. And I'm really committed to taking on both of these things, and it will take multiple strategies, including rent stabilization. And it will take more than an empty promise of ending homelessness in 5 years. So we need more housing units, and we need housing units that work for more people and families. We need to invest more in affordable housing and be really smart about leveraging the state and federal money coming our way. We need to invest more in public housing. I support using our city's public housing levy. We need to make sure we're delivering on the promise of more density that's in the 2040 plan. We also need to do all this work recognizing that housing that's affordable doesn't mean the same thing for everybody. Wealth and income disparities mean Black families and white families can afford different kinds of housing. We need specific solutions for cultural groups. For example, our Muslim neighbors have the need to not pay mortgage interest because of cultural and religious beliefs. We also need affordable housing that works for bigger families. Obviously, there's a lot of work we need to do, including opening up the conversation about rent stabilization and bravely moving forward in that work. I am ready and excited to partner with community groups, residents, small landlords, and folks across the city. Thanks.
Thank you. And we'll move to Phil Strum.
Hi, thank you. I support some form of rent stabilization. We know that rent stabilization can work. It has a long track record in many other cities, and we know that it doesn't destroy markets. I support specifically rent stabilization limits tied to inflation with some nominal percentage on top of that, 3 to 4 or 5% or something like that. It's an important tool to fight displacement and provide security to the people that need it. The CURA study for Minneapolis indicates that rent regulations have been effective at 2 of its primary goals, maintaining below market rent levels and moderating price appreciation. Housing security provides overwhelming physical, emotional, and mental health benefits and can be a significant historical factor in reducing crime. By providing stability, we can create a more livable and vibrant neighborhoods with long-term residency that helps drive wealth and value. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned, policy-wise. Thanks.
Thank you. And it looks like we do have another candidate that just joined us in the waiting room. So let's welcome him in. All right. And Jerrell Perry, we'll give you a moment, but if you wanted to do a 90-second introduction, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for everybody being here. Thank you for all the hard work that's been going into everything, especially over the past year. Our city's at its most pivotal point in its over 170-year history. We know everything that's going on with all the police and the need for racial reconciliation. There are things that can be done immediately. I've attached the list in the chat. There's been things that the city leadership has been asked for. We cannot wait for a new election cycle. This stuff has to be done now because lives are on the line. So I'm hoping that we can just get together, get our hands to the plow, and get work done that can effectively change lives for people in Minneapolis, including getting people off the streets, housing first, stable homes, stable schools. That's awesome, but we need housing first, something that will immediately impact the lives of our brothers and sisters that are out on the streets right now while we are sitting here warm having this conversation. There are too many things that we can do, and I just pray that everybody gets on board and we can do this. Teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you. We're going to jump back into the housing question. So I don't know if we should probably repeat it at this point. Let's do that. And then we'll move to Jacob Fry.
The question is, do you support a rent control policy, and what are the details you would want to see implemented?
Well, thank you so much for the question. The stated goal of rent control is to preserve and then create affordable housing. So first, let me tell you what we've been doing on that front. We have invested several times the previous record in affordable housing. In fact, we've invested more on a per capita basis than almost any city in the entire country. That's work we're proud of because we do believe that housing is a right, and we've been putting our money where our mouth is. We brought the program, Stable Homes, Stable Schools, to fruition, and it's now helped almost 3,000 kids experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity in our Minneapolis public school system. We've invested in everything from preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing to tenant eviction defense through another program we started called More Representation Minneapolis, which has now secured 5,600 hours worth of pro bono work to prevent eviction. We led the nation in our work around affordable housing, producing at record levels, and that work is recognized across the country. And my passion, my commitment is to push this work even further. So on the question of rent control, most every major economist throughout the world has concluded that it hamstrings mobility and supply, and it ultimately leads to increased prices. They've concluded that it has not been effective. And I listen to experts, I listen to data, I trust data and research. But as a formal policy has not yet been put forward, I will review the Minneapolis language before making a final decision. That's what we should always be doing. Reviewing the language, doing the analysis, listening to experts, and then making a decision. And this, by the way, is exactly how we should be doing it. I've always said from the very beginning that housing is a right. I said that when I took office. And as I said, we put our money where our mouth is. Other candidates can talk about catchphrases, but we have done the work and we have gotten results.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from AJ.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Zainab. So as many probably know, I ran for the special election in Ward 6 last year. And one of the fundamental policy platforms that was part of my campaign was rent stabilization and rent control. So for me, that question's a no-brainer. I'm very much in support of that idea. I do have to add, though, that when we're talking about rent control, what we're talking about is stabilizing the market for low-income people. The economic framework and the capitalist structures in the city and this country, broadly speaking, really does make that very, very difficult in terms of increases that are arbitrary year over year over year. So when we're talking about common sense solutions, rent control is that. I'm in favor of the Merck proposal, capping it, just like Phil said, to the inflation rate at 3% or shortly above that on the price index. But when we're talking about what we can do more to build more houses, Merck isn't going to do that by itself, right? So we have other solutions to actually garnish more investments in the city that's going to develop more affordable housing. One way of doing that, and I don't know when this became a dirty word, but taxes is good. We're one of the most progressive cities. And I think we can do a gentrification tax in the city where places that are being gentrified, places that have luxury apartments like the apartment that I'm actually sitting in right now, that can contribute to a pot of money to actually lower homelessness and obviously deal with that crisis that is in front of us. It's other states have done it. Arizona is one that comes to mind. And I would love to talk about that in more detail. And I think people will probably be asking me more about that during the campaign trail, but this is not a and or thing. I think rent control is part of the larger equation, which is to ultimately stabilize the rental market for low income and working class individuals.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Jerrell Perry.
All right, so rent control. I have affordable housing, and I've talked to many Minneapolis residents, and I've been told affordable housing does not work. We have affordable housing units being built right now that are going up at what's said to be over $1,600 monthly. Who is that affordable for? Not the people, not the poor people, not the working class people, not those families. We don't need more affordable housing. We need public housing that caps the amount of rent according to individual income, not researchers, not area medians, nothing. Individual circumstances, because that's what's going to determine what an individual can afford. Again, housing first. We've talked to businesses, even downtown Minneapolis business owners, hotels that have been so low on revenue with the pandemic that affects all of us, with the unrest over the last year. These businesses have not seen the revenue. They're missing that revenue. They have empty rooms. We can partner with them on a city level. Again, initiate housing first, get people off of the streets. This is so vitally important because it's turning into so many other issues. And we can solve this if we come together and stop trying to do it individually. If we come together as business, as community, as leadership, we can get it done. All it takes is the will, and we're there. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, we will hear from Sheila Nijad.
Thank you. So I've met some of you who are watching at Rent Control Coalition meetings. I've worked with IX in my role on the people's budget because we know that housing is part of the way that we get to safety. So I've been a lifelong renter. So when we talk about rent control, I really understand what it means and what's at stake. I currently live in the central neighborhood, and I know what it's like to have to leave your home because you can no longer afford the rent. I once had to move 3 times in 1 year because of bad landlords and unaffordable rent. The movement for rent control is being led by those who are most impacted. And there's detailed proposals that I support. So I support the Minneapolis United for Rent Control's 6-point plan. And as mayor, I would support that plan by having a fully funded renter protection board and increase in tenant protections. The tenant navigators through the city are incredibly helpful, and they were cut in this last year's budget. Their budget was reduced. So I would increase the funding for that program, increase funding towards Homeline, and contracting with community groups that educate renters about their rights. Right now, I have to believe the change in Minneapolis in housing by using my own eyes. I live a few blocks down from Powderhorn Park, where this summer, hundreds of families were living outside because they did not have an appropriate alternate place to live. If you walk down just a few blocks, there's a luxury apartment building, similar to those we see being built all across the city. And it was mostly empty for the entire summer. To me, that's a moral failing of our city. And rent control is part of the way that we get to building a city where small businesses and renters can all afford to stay in Minneapolis and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Our next question is a few-part question, so listen up. How do you envision repairing the broken relationship between the Minneapolis Police Department and communities of color in Minneapolis? How do you plan to address the rise in crime in Minneapolis? And what specifically would you advocate for as either alternative or supplements to the Minneapolis Police Department, if any, and why? And we'll also put the question in the chat.
All right, and we will start with Phil.
I'll start off by saying that without discipline, you don't really have an organization. We don't really have a police department. We just have a bunch of people running around who like to dress the same and look for drugs. I would say, as far as what to change, there's nothing wrong with the charter, and there's nothing wrong with our policy manual. It doesn't matter what you say the rules are if no one has to follow the rules. When police can pick and choose when and how the rules apply to them, like I said, that's not discipline, that's not an organization, that's just a bunch of people doing what they want. Police behave this way because they are rewarded for it, they are promoted for it, and they believe that they have to break the rules to be good cops, and I think that is absolutely false. I would also like to say that it is also false that the MPD requires cooperation from the community or anyone else to reform itself. Nothing is stopping the police department from doing what it needs to do. Putting it on the community is the worst sort of victim blaming that you can do. As far as reforms, aside from what I have on my website, driving discipline directly from the mayor's office, we can work on demilitarizing police culture, fighting back against the knee-jerk reaction to use violence all the time to control people. We're not serving people, we're controlling them. I would also just like to say that the charter amendment as we know it is not really a grassroots campaign. It is funded by the 1%. And it's, to me, it's just the worst sort of fashionable full radicalism that we have in this town for the past 30 years that lets white people off the hook. It lets us feel like we're doing something, but all we're doing is changing the org chart. We're not fixing the police department. We're just trying to work around the problem, in my view. As the campaign manager for Yes for Minneapolis stated herself, Karenia Smith, folks are not necessarily ready for abolition, and that is something that we were responsive to. This is not an abolitionist framework. This isn't a defund framework. This campaign is not polarizing.
Great, thank you. And we will move on to Jacob Fry.
Thank you, Zainab. Can I ask for some clarification real quick? Is this question is predominantly focused on rise of crime or accountability, or are we just combining those two questions together? Either way is fine. Just wanted to clarify to make sure I spent my time wisely.
Yeah, so we're basically combining it since it was a public safety question, so both. And you put in the chat if you kind of don't remember it.
Thank you. No, I remember the question, and I'll jump right in. Thank you, and you know, we all agree that the root causes of crime are systemic. They involve issues that go well beyond policing, like lack of stable housing, jobs, and healthy communities. And the evidence is clear. The pandemic and its corrosive impact on healthy social outlets for families and young people has only compounded the public safety issues that we're presently seeing in our city. So what we must be doing is make investments in a comprehensive approach to public safety. Every single one of my budgets has added in record levels funding for safety beyond policing measures, from mental health responders to co-responders to violence interrupters to social workers and hospital-based intervention. The city needs a both-and approach. And this is exactly where I differ from some of the candidates in this race. Late night and early morning calls from the chief relaying the murder of young men, sons, fathers, brothers, uncles in our city, they're happening far too frequently. And whether it's 911 response, investigation and detective work, or its response to gun violence that is taking place right now. You might not want to say it publicly, but I'll tell you the additional truth, which is that our city needs police, and we need police to radically change. Where I differ from other candidates is I don't believe our city should go down the road of defunding or abolishing the police, which according to the Vote Yes organizers is a stated goal. I don't believe that we need to cut down Chief Ardondo's work to build up safety beyond policing measures. I don't believe that a city with one of the lowest per capita ratios of police to residents is well served by further reducing our sworn capacity. What I do believe is that we must invest in violence prevention. We must invest in a comprehensive approach to public safety We need these strategies in place. They are essential to providing a response that is best tailored to the specific situations, ranging from helping neighbors out that are experiencing homelessness to combating the cycle of addiction. These situations, by and large, are not best served by an officer with a gun. So let's provide a compassionate approach that each and every resident deserves. And let's also recognize that a compassionate response necessitates that calls for help are answered.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from AJ Awet.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Zainab. I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves when we're talking about this issue and this topic. What frustrates me a little bit is that we have an opportunity in this city to really talk about this issue in a way that's transformative, not only for our local demographic, but throughout this country. I think this is the closest communities of color, Black and brown communities specifically, have to really rectify on this issue. And that starts with honesty, and it starts with truth. For me, that means to rebuild trust in this community, they need to be at the table. When people talk about transformation and people use language that others may not agree with, it's in the spirit of that transformation. To conflate it is, I think, a deeply mistaken fact. Honestly, for me, the first thing we need to do is say, are we willing to have that conversation and bring communities all together? When we think about the 19th century obsolete framework that we have in this city and in this country, it's completely obsolete. And to really have connection between police, we need to have community endorsed police. That doesn't mean that our city does not need police. That is a function of government. Law enforcement is going to be here to stay. But if we're going to have an honest conversation, we're talking about in what shape is it going to stay? Under my leadership, I would be the person to have those honest conversations. I would be the first one to champion a true Truth and Reconciliation Commission, really get community to be part of that construction. I don't think any one of us leaders or candidates per se have the answers today. And that's the first thing we need to acknowledge. But if we come together and we honestly try to put our heads together, I believe we will make a difference. And that's going to be a really big difference for BIPOC community speaking, especially if it's BIPOC led. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Jerrell Perry.
All right. Thank you for the question. We've been discussing this for over a year now, a lot longer than that, but it's definitely been zoned in on over the last year. Everyone agrees that we need some safety system. The current structure relies on police, not protecting and serving the people, but it protects the rich from the poor, and it protects the few scared white Americans from everyone else. We cannot move forward like this. That's been made clear by Minneapolis residents. Communities all over our city have said that they need the research, the experts, all that needs to go out the window. Experts from projects performed somewhere else over somebody else's circumstances, it needs to be out the window. We are not them, we are not there. We are here in Minneapolis, and that is the info that we should use to measure the actions that we take to implement the changes that we make. We must listen to the community and bring ideas together and go to the community control of police. Nobody, no person, no organization can better determine what the people of Minneapolis need than the people of Minneapolis. Residents I have talked to simply want accountability. That's all they want is accountability. And city leadership has been blessed with an opportunity over and over and over to provide accountability. They have not. It is time to try something different. To know that change is necessary and to not change can be self-destructive. And we don't want our city to go down that. We've already seen a glimpse of that, and that's not somewhere any of us want to go. We have to do what the people are asking us to do. There's simple things to even assure the safety of everyone while the police are out there. Even if it starts with traffic stops, to where we're not doing traffic stops for stuff that does not cause an immediate threat to public safety. to where people are not having to be taken out of their cars unless they're being under arrest, to where people are not being touched unless they are under arrest. Their rights should not be violated unless they have been confirmed to broken the law and they are now under arrest and have been read their rights. This is simple. It's so simple. It's mind-boggling how we are still discussing how to make people feel safe in the presence of police, when police is supposed to equal safety, right? There's just too much that we can do. And then even
Mary, we're gonna have to cut you off because it's we're well past the 2 minutes, but thank you. We will be returning to another public safety question. So we want to hear more of what you have to say, but we're gonna have to
no problem. I'll be ready when it comes back around.
Perfect. All right, next we'll hear from Sheila Nijad.
Thank you for this question. Yes, it's certainly a lot to cover in 2 minutes. So this is my entire area of expertise. And one of the things that I've done is study the history of policing and reform in the US, and specifically the history in Minneapolis and the reforms attempted over the last 3 years. So policing began in the US as slave patrols, and in Minnesota, also the forced removal of indigenous peoples. The first major elected official to suggest that police needed better training in order to stop racist police violence was Harry Truman. We have been trying the same police reforms for over 70 years. Minneapolis has adopted many of them: body cameras, implicit bias training, de-escalation training, hiring more officers of color and female officers. We've tried it. In order to reduce violence against communities of color, we need to build systems that operate from a foundation of racial justice. To me, it seems more far-fetched to believe that we are 1 or 2 tweaks away from getting reform right after trying it for 7 decades, than to think that we can build safety with less racial violence through unarmed crisis responders, restorative justice, and meeting people's basic needs. We deserve a city that values Black life, where no one loses their life because of a traffic stop, rest in peace, Dante Wright, because of a mental health crisis, rest in peace, Thurman Blevins, David Smith, and Barbara Schneider, because they are a 14-year-old kid walking home in Minneapolis, rest in peace, Courtney Williams, or over a counterfeit bill, rest in peace, George Floyd. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. And last we will hear from Kate Knuth.
Thank you. I think in this question, it's really important to start with the fact that, of course, Black communities and communities of color don't trust police because police actively harm communities of color. 78% of police searches between June 2019 and May 2020 were done to Black residents, while only 20% were white people. Black people are stopped and searched and booked more often than white people. That's just a fact. That's how our system is working. And we need to take really active steps to end the harm of policing. And we need to do the long-term work of transforming our public safety system. I think some of the immediate steps, the kind of things people are hungry for now, involve reducing and potentially eliminating pretext stops. We know, unfortunately, with deep experience in this past week with Dante Wright, that pretext stops can lead to not just small harm, but the worst harm a person can experience. I support moving pretext stops into traffic enforcement into regulatory services or a new Department of Public Safety. The mayor has authority here and could be making progress here, and we haven't seen it. I think we need to end confrontation between armed law enforcement at encampments like we saw in Near North in March. There is a lot of work to move people from encampments into stable housing. Law enforcement shouldn't be part of that work. And when we think about the crime, I think it's really important to bring into this conversation that we are moving through a global pandemic, and the economic insecurity, the disconnection, kids being out of school. Crime isn't something that's only rising in Minneapolis. It's something arising around the world or around the country. And we need to have that as part of the conversation as well. And finally, I don't think trying to reform our current police-centric system is going to work to get the results we want. And I am ready and willing to make the work and to do what we need alongside community to create a public safety system that makes sure every person in our city feels safe in their neighborhood and no one in our city experiences police brutality.
Thank you. And I think we're ready to move on to the next question.
Awesome. Thank you all for answering that. Our next question is, what value do you see the arts holding for healing, change, growth, and emotional health of residents? And how do you invite them into that value? And this question is from Black Table Arts.
All right, first we'll hear from Jacob Fry.
Well, thank you. Perhaps more than any industry, any other ethnicity, Black creatives have put our city on the map, and that's from Prince to Kino of all. Creatives show us the truth, and they help us imagine a better future, and they keep our economy moving. And our administration has established 7 cultural districts across the city that receive preference in the allocation of funding. This includes everything from real estate ownership to city service and cleanup to art funding that can ultimately bolster the incredible creations of our opportunities for Black, POC, Native, and immigrant artists across all mediums. Additionally, we're partnering with Juxtaposition Arts to provide $750,000 of support. We invested in the creation of the Capri Block, which is a beacon of creativity and art on the north side. And there's a host of other partnerships that have bolstered community-based art. We also invested in artist lofts and housing because we cannot allow artists to be pushed out through some form of gentrification. Young creatives should also have the resources to pursue their passion, and we need that now more than ever. You're essential to telling the story of our city in ways that are truthful, constructive, and visionary, and hold politicians and electeds accountable. So I want to assure that you can continue to call Minneapolis home, and that's why I support this kind of direct funding for young Black creatives to pursue their dreams, attainable and deep affordable housing for emerging artists, and then ultimately changing the RFP processes that we have so that emerging artists and specifically Black artists can compete for city contracts and then win.
Thank you. Next we'll hear from AJ Alwyn.
Yeah, so that is a very great question, and one that I actually value a lot. As a co-executive director at the Cedar Riverside, we have a cultural center there, the Cedar Riverside Cultural Center, where we had an opportunity as an immigrant group coming to the city to showcase our talents and our art and our creativity. I'm actually very happy to be empowering several youths in our neighborhood that came up with a script. So when it comes to this, I think it is a dear topic to have, but we need to have credibility on this issue. And I think, honestly, we need to break the mold of what promoting art looks like and who's going to be championing those issues. I think when it comes to my campaign and the perspective that I have, I think I embody that vision for the diversity of the city. And I embody it in a way that will be able to bring cross-cultural relations between communities and the arts. And I think once we start getting to the field of not being in pockets, but actually being integrated amongst all of ourselves, we're going to have an art culture here unlike anything else in the country. And that is what I think really gravitated me to this city. And if I just share a short story, it was a Detroit journalist during the uprising that was shocked to the diversity of the city. She was just blown away with how diverse the city was. And that really comes down to also within our art programs, when we have so many talented individuals from the East African community to the African American community, from North Side to South Side, and even our traditional plays in the Guthrie. And once we start actually getting people to be empowered and not being separated, I think it's going to do tremendous things for our city's reputation. But I think when we talk about this, I think most people are going to be in favor of it. I just want people to also remember championing this thing is something that I would be very, very proud of as mayor. And I would love to be able to have that opportunity.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Jerrell Perry.
All right. I see tremendous value
in the arts holding for healing, change, growth, and emotional health of residents. I would invite them in by asking them for their input, valuing their ideals, their culture, so they can see themselves as part of the community, as part of what's going on. A big part of that is George Floyd Square. Many residents have asked that that be made into a cultural arts district. It has served the past year providing a healing space, even made more vulnerable to crime in the area because police have been allowed not to patrol properly to provide safety for residents in that area simply because people are exercising their First Amendment rights. They might use different words that we might not use on this forum, but they have a First Amendment right to use whatever words they want to express the way they feel. So that's a big part of it. And it's already been started. There's so much art over there. There's so much art that's been made the last year that has no place to go, made by Black artists, made by white artists, Native artists, Asian American artists, Hispanic American artists. Everybody has participated in the last year. We have a unique opportunity to bring all of these communities together, and we can do that. That's all that I have on that part. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jerrell. Next, we'll hear from Sheila Nijad.
Hello, thank you for the question. Yes, I work at a local art studio, Ricardo Levins Morales Art Studio, where we send what Ricardo calls medicinal art all over the city and all over the world. And I do believe that art can be medicine in the city. I think of last summer's murals after the murder of George Floyd and the extreme violence committed by the Minneapolis Police Department. And these murals transformed spaces of trauma into healing. They painted windows into the world we want to build. And the city needs to make greater investments in arts and culture, in particular for queer, trans, and BIPOC artists. I support the city staff recommendations from this last week for a new city coordinator department for arts and culture, funded as a part of community healing work. And as someone who has worked as a freelancer and worked for freelance artists, I'll fight for this new department to use equitable payment frameworks. Too often artists are asked to do all the work first and get paid afterwards, but the rent doesn't work like that. So we need to make sure that if we're supporting BIPOC artists, if we're supporting queer and trans artists, that we're able to pay folks up front so that they can do the work they want to do and thrive in Minneapolis. So I thank Black Table Arts for the question and thank them also for all the support they did for Black and Brown youth who were out in the streets last week, resisting and fighting for the world we want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Kate Knuth.
Sorry about the unmuting there. I think it's clear that arts and culture are always important in our community. They help us make sense of who we are. They weave our connections to each other and to our past and to our future. And right now, art, culture work is even more essential. We have been moving through a pandemic. We are feeling the relentless trauma of police violence, and the work of artists and how art invites us into relationship with each other and with imagining a different kind of future is more important than ever. I think in a really amazing historic example of how arts have helped our country navigate the kind of potentially transformative moment we're in was during the creation of the New Deal. And we still see the impacts of that investment in art and specific artists today. And we need to build on that tradition. But I want to be clear, we need to do it different this time. There was definitely racial justice issues around the New Deal. We need to center the voices of our neighbors and our artists who have been most harmed by injustice and make sure that we are listening to and being led by these artists and the culture workers in our community who are stewarding space for us to grieve and to connect, who are reminding us of who we are in the places we inhabit through murals and public art in different spaces. And at the same time, we know that many artists have struggled during the pandemic because it has not allowed us to gather in the ways that art invites us to gather. And so we need to actively meet this challenge. And I've seen innovation like in St. Paul with Springboard Center for the Arts and their basic income pilot for artists for 18 months. We need to do similar kinds of bold innovations here in Minneapolis. And I will take the lead of artists in our community, of city staff who've already been leading, to be a full partner in this work.
Thank you. And last we'll hear from Phil Sturm.
Hello, thank you again. We know that public art fosters community, generates identity, and creates incalculable social and economic value for our city. Art educates and informs us of our history and lights the way to our future. Through public art, we could share in our lessons and create new possibilities from those lessons. It could teach us about our mistakes and spark new ideas to avoid making new ones. And it could also sustain us and our various communities in dark times. As part of any reforms in public safety and housing, we need to integrate diverse artistic voices from our BIPOC communities to tell their stories and to teach others about our history and our history embedded within their perspective. We need to foster these talents within our city and lift them up and give them space and funding to express their struggles, pains, and triumphs. Overall, it is an important part of our local economy with many benefits and knock-on effects that we can't really capture in any sort of data study. That's why I would like to see policies based on driving demand side, demand for artists, and not just subsidizing artists themselves, but also getting other people that aren't in the art community introduced to and participating in art consumption through subsidized ticket programs and stuff like that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for answering that. The next question is from Community Power, and it's how would you drive a hard bargain with Energy Utilities Excel and Centerpoint so that Minneapolis can meet its climate action plan goals and its 100% renewable energy goals?
All right, and first we will hear from AJ Awad.
Thank you for that question, Zainab. And I had the fortune to speak with Community Power just a couple of days ago on the topic, and they educated me really well on it. And ultimately, what it seems like there's a lack of leadership in that department. There's great council members that are doing good work to hold utilities companies accountable. What we need from a mayor is honestly someone that's going to cooperate with those individuals, that's prepared, and that's going to have metrics in place to know when the red line has been crossed. And that's doing the work of the people. We are accountable to the people. So in my administration, you would see that leadership, not working independent of the city council and the members that are very much involved in this process, but working collaboratively with them, and in fact, possibly even leading them as we charge to make sure to hold these utilities companies accountable. I was actually excited to see that there are some changes that are being made, for instance, in inclusive financing, which I found is a beautiful thing from my community in the East African, which, as Kate said, struggles with interest rate type of financing. And that type of solution is not only creative, but it's very much welcoming. But from the question, I think what really needs to be understood is that we don't work for the utilities as elected officials, and we don't work to further their goals and interests. We do the work of the people. And as a mayor, what's required is for you to make it a little uncomfortable for them when it comes to what deals are being brought forth, and honestly working with the city council to make sure that we are holding them accountable. So that's what you would see from my leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, AJ. And next we'll hear from Jerrell Perry.
All right. How would you drive a hard bargain with Energy Utilities Excel Centerpoint so that Minneapolis can meet its climate action plan goals and its 100% renewable energy? Again, teamwork makes the dream work. Coming together, setting hard dates, like AJ just mentioned, draw metrics to keep track of where we're at and where we're going, and keep updating along the way and partnering with them, working with them, not telling them what to do or how to do it, but seeing what's best, bringing community in to the conversation so that it's not us versus them thing, but they're seeing the lives that this is actually impacting and how it's impacting those lives. So I think that would be a big, very big part of it, bringing community into it. I'll save the rest of my 2 minutes.
All right, wasn't sure, I didn't want to cut you off. Thank you. And next we'll hear from Sheila Nijad.
Thank you. Thanks, Community Power, for this question. So as I mentioned, I am a renter and working class worker, which means I've lived in a lot of different neighborhoods in the city. Before my current house, I lived in East Phillips, which is one of the most polluted neighborhoods in the city. And that's why when I think about meeting Minneapolis's climate action goals, I know that it's important that we not only meet them for the city, but for every neighborhood, right? We know that the neighborhoods who are largest proportion people of color, largest proportion poor and working class folks, are also the ones who bear the brunt of the most pollution and pay most of their income into utility bills. And so that's why, as mayor, I will be committed to using the 2024 energy negotiations to explore all options. And that includes standing up against Excel and Centerpoint, because we need people to be able to afford the utilities that they're using. We need to make sure that everyone has a right to clean air, clean water, and green spaces. And we need an orientation that puts the people before profit, before corporations. And I think that it also requires a coalition building approach, right? And that's part of why I'm running for mayor as well, is because I'm a coalition builder. That's what I've done in my organizing and policy work for the last decade. And in order to change the way that we do utilities in Minneapolis, we need a mayor who can work with the council, who can negotiate with the utilities, and who can dream big, bigger than the status quo, right? And in addition to looking at the utilities, I'm also interested in closing the HERC, which pours toxic fumes into North Minneapolis, and making sure that the Green Zones councils are actually listened to, and that we implement great ideas like the East Phillips Indoor Urban Farm. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Kate Knuth.
I want to be really clear here. I will be an unabashed climate justice champion in the mayor's office. I think Minneapolis wants it. It's necessary to meet the crisis we have, and I have the skill and the track record and commitment to make it happen. Appreciate the question from Community Power specifically about holding utilities accountable. And I thank you for your work on municipalization that led to the Clean Energy Partnership. And I will be not just a participant, but an active, ambitious leader within that amazing platform. And right now, Minneapolis, we have to do multiple things to meet the climate crisis we have. One is we need to actually implement the 2040 plan and deliver on its promises. And as mayor, I will make climate justice central to this implementation, and appointing department leadership and the planning commission and how I communicate with neighborhoods and residents about why we're making certain investments and decisions around street design. I think we need to strengthen our climate action plan. We haven't had a new climate action plan in the city since 2013. And I appreciate the question about meeting our goals. Our goals aren't ambitious enough. They don't meet the science that's of what we need to do to avoid the worst of climate change, the goals that President Biden just put out this week. And then most importantly, we need to center racial and economic justice in this work. That means pathways to clean energy and climate careers for especially our Black and Brown community members. It means inclusive financing so everyone can be part of the clean energy future. And it means climate resilience. Our city doesn't even have a climate resilient strategy. And at the most fundamental level, climate change increased risks. And the people who are going to bear the brunt of those risks are already the most vulnerable in our community. And we need to do proactive work to make sure we are building up the resilience of the infrastructure, the neighborhoods, the green space, and the social connections and people and economic wealth of our communities to navigate this era of climate change. I'm ready to meet that challenge, and I'm excited to work with the folks in Minneapolis to do so.
Thank you, Kate. And next we'll hear from Phil Sturm.
Thank you. I think the best, most actionable way in the immediate future to bring accountability to the process and leverage political power with the utilities is to push as much as we can for decentralized, community-based renewable energy alternatives. We can build out or start investing in sort of infrastructures that give people an option outside of centralized utilities. The roadblocks right now to municipalization are huge, obviously, with the regulations in place and the laws regarding that. But we can still pursue like a hybrid model of creating power alternatives for people to tap into and choose for themselves. Overall, climate change should be an organizing principle to our overall approach in our city governance. We should aggressively market energy improvements to homeowners through inclusive financing, like others have said. We can use our earmarked sources of funding to really push and market these things, because we really need to cut down on our natural gas consumption, which is driving our city's emissions. And we can work to help people get off of natural gas. And if we can find renewable sources of electricity, we can push that way to help reduce those emissions. And we can also invest in more district-wide heating and energy systems, which will allow us to drive efficiencies in bulk and not piece by piece and property by property. And that would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And last we'll hear from Jacob Fry.
Thank you. Many of the aspects that have already been brought up, they are presently underway, but let's be clear, when we talk about climate action, it's important to acknowledge that we have to go bigger. Climate is very much a life and death issue that needs to be treated accordingly. And that's why we're taking significant action around climate and embedding climate change strategies in as many city aspects as possible. Good housing policy and climate action, for instance, they are codependent. And our groundbreaking 2040 plan didn't just do away with exclusionary zoning, it also embedded climate work in long-term planning. You want to improve climate? Yeah, you live in a city. We just gave more Minneapolis residents and would-be residents the ability to do that by allowing for a diversity of housing options in every neighborhood and by subtracting a long gas-powered commute from the suburbs. That's an important piece. And I was the only candidate that campaigned on this issue when I ran for mayor in 2017. I advocated for the implementation, and then we got it done. That's a result. We've launched the city's 4D program, which combines affordable housing preservation with renewable energy efficiency incentives. And by the way, it's been working. We invested $2.3 million to fund energy efficiency improvements for the city's biggest public housing renovation project in history, and redirected $1.2 million to the Rebuild Resilient initiative. And that's going to be key for our BIPOC community and our immigrant-owned small businesses that were hit hard following the unrest, to make sure that they have some of the energy efficiency upgrades that they need in rebuilding. And then when it comes to transit priorities, we can also make a big impact. That's bus-only lanes and better bike infrastructure, and we can get cars off the road and ultimately reduce our collective carbon footprint. We also launched the Climate Action and Racial Equity Fund with McKnight and the Minneapolis Foundation to provide grants to community-led groups and projects that meaningfully advance our priorities, including the Strategic Racial Equity Action Plan. So looking ahead, we've already had proposals from vendors to realize our 2023 goal of 100% renewable city operations. We need to get there. And this is undoubtedly among the defining issues of our time, and we've got to recognize it as such and act accordingly.
All right, great. We're at time, and let's head to the next question.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. The next question is from Unite Here, and it's regarding economic development. The city of Minneapolis sometimes finds itself involved in private and public development projects. These projects can sometimes be transformative for the city, surrounding neighborhoods, and working families. An example would include the future Upper Harbor Terminal. project that includes a master developer, the Minneapolis Park Board, and the City of Minneapolis, not just in a planning process and construction, but in the potential for jobs at the site into the future? Are you supportive of community benefits agreement, operational neutrality agreements, and project labor agreements as part of a process that moves workers and residents forward and that protects the proprietary interest of Minneapolis taxpayers in such project? And it's in the chat.
All right, and we will first hear from Jerrell Perry.
I absolutely am supportive of community benefits agreements, especially with all these projects that are going on. You drive past projects in the city and even in BIPOC neighborhoods, and you'll see 20, 30 construction workers out, and they're all white Americans. So the community needs to be included in those projects. At least 60% of the revenue generated off those projects should be going back into the community, not into people's pockets that are going to take it back out of our city into their communities and support their community's local economy. Whether it's that, even our infrastructure, teachers, policemen, hospital workers, construction workers, we bring them all in from outside of Minneapolis, give them our money that Minneapolis taxpayers generate, and they take their paychecks back to their communities. The money is continuously being pulled out of Minneapolis, and Minneapolis residents are suffering, and that is something that we could no longer afford to do. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Sheila Nijad.
Thank you, and thanks Unite here for this question. So this is actually one of the first things that we held a community discussion session on for my campaign in a policy by the people session. North Minneapolis residents deserve developments and jobs that will serve the working class North Side community and not gentrify it. As a union member and member of the working class, I know the importance of fair union jobs and the devastation that can come with gentrification. What's at stake with the Upper Harbor Terminal process is how we approach job creation in the city. Right now, as it stands, the plan funnels money into the pockets of our state's wealthiest developers. And residents on the North Side are already feeling the negative effects of rising property taxes without the benefits of rising income. That's why I believe in any Upper Harbor Terminal development, we need to restart the community planning process in a way that actually centers community voice and follows the desires of those who live in North Minneapolis. I will ask the council to listen to and support a new community planning process and take serious the community requests that have already been put forth, such as a space for food production and urban agriculture. I would also ask the council to pursue a new plan that focuses on serving the needs of the current community without threatening residents of gentrification. We need strong anti-gentrification policies as well. We need jobs with justice, and that means jobs that support working class people and working class communities. We have a great opportunity here with the Upper Harbor Terminal project, and it's our duty to move it forward in a just and equitable way. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Kate Knuth.
Thank you for the question, and for Unite here for bringing it in. And I know many Unite here members are really struggling as hospitality workers in our economy. And so I really appreciate the leadership of making sure your members are navigating this moment, and that our city as a whole is stepping up to make sure we have economic justice and strong worker protections and community benefits and really potentially transformative projects in our city. If you read about Upper Harbor Terminal and many of the things that the city has put out, they call it a once in a lifetime opportunity for development in the city. And I agree with that assessment. It sits at the intersection of two really amazing community assets in our city, the river and the riverfront, and the vibrant North Minneapolis neighborhood. And we need to make sure that as this development moves forward, that we are protecting the health, wealth, and economic security, not just for North Minneapolis, but with North Minneapolis. And not surprisingly, with big development, there's a whole lot swirling around it. And I've been in active conversation with folks in the community to better understand what's needed to make sure it delivers on the promises. I appreciate Councilmember Cunningham's leadership to bring North Minneapolis leadership into the coordinated development plan. And I've also been in conversation with folks who've pushed back and forced the environmental review on the site. And I really think at the core of this development forces us to grapple with a big question. And that is, do we have enough in place to hold the developer with big capital accountable to meeting our community needs? And at least in this forum, the big question is, what is the mayor going to do to make sure the development delivers on its promise? And as this process moves forward, I'm going to be laser focused on making sure the promised benefits for the development for North Minneapolis residents are delivered on. And I want to be in continued conversation and transparent to people with different views in this process. And just to very clearly answer your question, I support the community benefit agreements, project labor agreements as part of that holding the developer accountable if we move forward with the developer.
Thank you. All right, next we'll hear from Phil Sturm.
Yeah, I do support community benefit agreements, wage floors, union requirements for certain contracts, and limiting subcontracting out to non-union labor where possible. I think that the project overall needs to do a little bit more on the affordable side. There's probably 167 very affordable units planned, which really isn't enough. We need to think more creatively beyond these stock solutions. Like, we've had this process for decades. This is what we always do. And people are trying to present it as a solution, but it's just the same thing over and over and over again. These solutions are tailored to serve billionaires' bottom lines and not Minneapolis residents. UHT can be a new experiment in how we incorporate all the challenges we are facing, from climate change to public safety to affordable housing, and also as a test bed for promoting and developing BIPOC ownership and development of small business. We can spur economic prosperity for the North Side with this beyond sort of the stock answers that we always get posing as new and exciting solutions. Thanks.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Jacob Fry.
Thank you. My answer to unite here with regard to labor peace, PLA, and community benefits is yes, yes, and yes. Upper Harbor Terminal is an opportunity to connect an historic North Minneapolis residents throughout who made this community wonderful to begin with to the Mississippi riverfront. They've been cut off by a whole lot of heavy industry, followed by a massive highway, both of which were placed without regard for our Black community and the neighborhood assets that they built themselves. And on these, by the way, 48 acres, we can create culturally affirming recreation activity on shared green space, and we can create attainable jobs for the community and ownership opportunities as well that can showcase and highlight the North Side entrepreneurs that are already doing incredible work. We also understand the long-term importance of this site, and it requires that we do the work now to ensure that we create generational community wealth. First, what that means is hiring of local and union workers and establishing very clear and binding contracts requiring labor peace and hiring of our Black community members. It means prevailing wage and meeting or exceeding our supplier diversity goals for the construction. When we build something of this significance, the kind of world-class amenity that we're looking for here right now, you got to do it right. And doing it right means you put the economic inclusion into action and you ensure that Black business owners are prime contractors on the development as well. So that's the direction we need to move with respect to Upper Harbor Terminal. I want to thank the CPC and community members that have weighed in heavily, council members, as well as Sean Pierce from my staff, who's been doing incredible work on moving this project forward.
Thank you. And last we'll hear from AJ Awad.
Thank you for that question. So when I first moved to the state, actually early on in coming to Minneapolis, I settled in 26th and 3rd in the north side. So that swath of land that we're talking about in the Upper Harbor Terminal is actually places that I used to ride my bike with friends and climb on those sand hills. And to see that now in 2021, we are finally getting investments into this neighborhood is something that I find very, very important and welcome. As it relates to, as everybody said, supporting community benefit agreements, that's a no-brainer. I think community should be very much involved in the investments and the developments that happen in their community, especially when it's very marginalized and disproportionately affected communities like in the north side. However, we have to also be honest with this agreement. This agreement has a lot of community input. I was up last night looking at the report on the website and looking at the contract, possible redevelopment agreement and contract terms. Some things that the community is asking for when we talk about hiring local people is reporting on that. Currently, that's not a standard issue in the contract. That's just a proposed amendment. So what we need is to have somebody that has credibility on this issue. I believe under my administration as mayor, what I would first do is listen to community and making sure that we bridge the gap in the difference, making sure that they have the accountability measures that they can put in place to actually verify what's happening is happening, and also alleviate the concerns they may have of possible threatened gentrification. As the mayor said, and other people have said, this is a really good development project on principle. What usually happens though in scenarios like this is the execution gets messed up. And what the people need to understand is the person executing is very much responsible for that. And with your support and hopefully with my leadership, I can ensure that we can actually get this to be something that the North Side is proud of and ultimately is North Side driven. And I will welcome all my North Siders to understand that. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And the last question before closing statements is, do you believe that the 38th and Chicago intersection should be opened up to automobile traffic before the core demands of the no justice, no street movement are met? Why or why not? And Sheila, you're answering first.
Wonderful, thank you. So I live a few blocks away from George Floyd Square. I've been there many times over the past years. And if you go there for one of their morning meetings, you will see what community building looks like in practice. It's people sitting together around a fire, figuring out what they need to do to support one another. It's finding out who on the block just lost that loose tooth that has been waiting to come out for a few days. It's building connection and building community. And we have seen very clear demands out of the community that are for investment in Black community that has been constantly passed over in favor of investment in militarization of our city. The resources are there. It's about who we choose to give them to. And I know that crime is up too, right? I live in the neighborhood, but we need real solutions to the issues. And filling the jails does not reduce crime. We need solutions that get to the root of crime and violence and harm. And those are solutions that address poverty, address lack of mental health care, address a lack of education on healthy relationships and consent. Can you imagine what George Floyd Square could be if we actually invested in the community? It could be a national example of what healing and transformation looks like after state-inflicted tragedy. As mayor, I will take up that challenge. I will support the community of 38th and Chicago with justice, because you cannot bypass justice to get to unity. You have to meet the demands of the Black community. You have to meet the demands of those who have been most affected by state violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Kate Knuth.
Thank you for this question. I think it's a really important one for our community. And I need to be clear, whatever decision is made, it needs to be made in conversation with and in collaboration with folks at 38th in Chicago, residents and business owners, as well as the stewards of George Floyd Square. And that's not happening right now. And frankly, I suspect it's not happening because these conversations can be really uncomfortable. And frankly, that's the antithesis of how I approach my work and how I would approach this work as mayor. George Floyd Square and how it has been tended is asking us to do things in a radically different way, to imagine a different future. And as mayor, the mayor has authority to open up the street to traffic or not. And the mayor's in a unique position in making this decision. And I've actually, frankly, been pretty disappointed in the unwillingness to lean into this work of being in relationship with community, to work through the really hard and essential conversations, to not just have a simplistic decision about the place, but to use it and the way decisions are made around it to navigate into a turning point for a different, more just future. And I think meeting the demands is not checking off something on a piece of paper. It is more a relationship and a process and deep community connection to move through those decisions together. And then of course, being a final decision maker is hard. And that is the job of the mayor. And my approach will be to build relationships, to center community, and to know that no decision, quite frankly, is going to make everyone happy. But every decision and the process behind it is an opportunity to build or break trust between government and our community, particularly folks in our community who have been harmed too much and for too long by government. And every decision is also an opportunity to move forward and to turn toward a more just future.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Phil Sturm.
Hi, yes, I believe that George Floyd Square, we should work towards a solution that converts the area to a pedestrian-friendly, mass transit-friendly, bike-friendly area. We can block off streets before, we've done it. We can create parking where we block the street off to help out. Because it's the foot traffic that drives business there. It's not the automobile traffic. We should create a monument that preserves the space where George Floyd passed to keep it sacred and to keep people from driving over it. The city and the police probably don't want a monument to their greatest failure, which is probably why they don't want to see anything happen but going back to normal. But there is no more normal, and we're going to go forward in a different fashion. But I would also say that we should work together with those stakeholders in that community to come together for an agreement. But I want to caution that we can't govern by demand or ultimatum either. I mean, anybody can anoint themselves as a spokesperson and start making demands, but we really can't proceed in that fashion either. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Jacob Fry.
Thank you. For many months now, I've been working with Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins and Council Member Cano to make sure that we are having the necessary communications associated with 38th and Chicago. And the truth about 38th and Chicago is that there are many truths. Over the last 11 months, George Floyd Square has been a space for community gathering, racial justice, and racial healing. Throughout the last several weeks, George Floyd Square has served as a gathering place for communities both in Minneapolis and around the world to pay homage to George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. Adorned with extraordinary art, symbolic gestures, and very much an activist-led approach, George Floyd Square has helped to center a centuries in the making reckoning around racial justice and healing, and has been a really important hub for an historically Black neighborhood. I've had heart-wrenching conversations also with Black families and business owners near the square. We've seen children's birthday parties that have been cut short by gunfire, and so many more stories that I constantly hear. Let me preempt it right now, and for those that would suggest this is simply stoking fear, this is a reality of the office of mayor. This isn't a spectator sport. This is the reality of the conversations that you have when you need to face all the people you represent, when not all of them agree. I've heard some participants at this forum suggest that it's just a matter of bringing people together and listening. And yeah, that's certainly part of it. But there are times when people have legitimate and competing interests, and you got to take a position. My position is we need to do right by community. We need to forever recognize George Floyd Square as a memorial to racial healing and justice. We also need to ensure that our residents and business owners who have invested their lives in building community in this neighborhood have access to the most basic city services. And that is why, yes, we ultimately do need to move forward with a phased reopening that includes a permanent memorial.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from AJ Awad.
Thank you for that question. First and foremost, rest in power to George Floyd and condolences to his family, of course. When we're talking about this issue, I think, the role that we're talking about is a leadership role at the end of the day. And ultimately, what the leader is going to have to do is make positions. As a mediator, for me personally, I understand that when there are opposing views on issues, ultimately what matters is trying to identify the interests, creating an environment for the conversation to facilitate compromise, and then ultimately trying to bring people together in that solution forward. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to get what they want, but what it does mean is you're still going to listen to community and let community lead. And for me on this issue, that's exactly what I intend to do. I intend to use my skills as an ADR specialist to make sure that people are coming to the table, people are identifying those interests that they have, and then figuring a way to carve out a solution that may be a compromise, but ultimately satisfies the interests of all groups. And for me, there's nothing more important than the moment that we're in, and having a memorial and having something dedicated as a sign of history, because we do not want history to repeat itself. Too often we've seen in different states and different jurisdictions, this does not happen. And for us, as the world is looking at us, as the nation is going to try to emulate what we do, we have to be very conscious of that. And that means we have to be deliberate. That deliberate nature for me is making sure that that place is a shrine and is a community gathering space, but also taking considerations of community when it comes to safety and business. Phil had a great suggestion with making it a parking space. I mean, we can have a lot of creative solutions, but ultimately we need a mayor in the city that's going to bring in those creative ideas, and that's not going to lead from the back, but lead from the front with community holding their hand. So thank you.
Thank you. And last, we'll hear from Jerrell Perry. And then as a reminder, after this, we will be moving into the closing statements.
Do I believe that 30th and Chicago intersection should be open to automobile traffic before the core demands of the No Justice, No Streets movement are met? Absolutely not. As Mayor Fry just mentioned, there are legitimate and competing interests in this area. Yes, some have interest in the lives and livelihoods of all Minneapolis residents, and not just a few that have dictated the last 170 years of results or the lack of results in the past 4 years, especially exacerbated this past year. And others have interest in their property and in maintaining their elite status and their protection from the police. Again, it's something that we can no longer tolerate. We're looking at the justice resolution, which was presented to city leadership a whole year ago, and nothing has been done about it. And even worse, nothing has been said about it. We've been out meeting with the people that are holding the space. They're not asking for money to put in their pockets and walk away. They're not asking that somebody buy them a house or buy them a business. They're asking for investments in the community. Look at this, invest $400,000 into the George Floyd Square through the neighborhood associations to create new jobs for young people, which will help deter violence. Invest $300,000 in George Floyd Square zone through the neighborhood association to provide undoing racism training for the Black community, provided by the People's Institute for Survival and beyond. There are other things, asking for facade grants to renovate the buildings over there, asking for space for the medical team to set up to be able to take care of people in the community, asking for a spot for the security team to set up to take care of the community. This is not people asking for stuff for themselves. They are asking for stuff to support the livelihoods of all Minneapolis residents, and we have to do this right now. There's no option. There's no option.
Thank you, Jerrell. All right, so just as a quick reminder, I do wanted to state again that all of the organizations that submitted questions have not endorsed any candidate, and we just want to make sure that that's known. And no question should be construed as an endorsement of any candidate. We are going to be moving into our closing statements now. I know we're running a little bit over, so thank you guys. We'll try to move really quickly through this. And let's start with Kate Knuth.
Well, first of all, thank you for everyone coming today and taking the time to be in conversation about the future of our city. It's really important. Anyone who knows me knows that I work on climate change. That's driven a lot of my career and a lot of my expertise. But what really drives me at my core is taking on the challenges of our time in the place I call home, Minneapolis and Minnesota. And given that commitment, I feel a call to leadership now, because we're in a defining moment for our city and we need a new mayor to help us navigate this defining moment. In the months since George Floyd, we have been aching for city leadership to fully see us, to see our pain and our grief and our very justified anger. We've been aching for city leadership to help us make sense of what's happening. And obviously this work isn't easy. Transformative moments just aren't. They are unsteady, they are uncomfortable, they are full of conflict. Because transformative moments force us to reckon with how things have been. This one is forcing us to reckon with the fact that the systems we inhabit were not meant to serve everyone by design, and in many cases are actively harming people. This kind of moment requires real leadership, a mayor who is present and accountable, and I'm running to be this mayor, and I'm asking you to join me. And I am not just asking for your vote. I want to be really clear. I am asking for your commitment to the hard, joyful work of building our city. And I will show up alongside you every day and bring the full power of the mayor's office to this work. So we turn this historic moment to a real turning point towards justice and deeply rooted safety in our community.
Thank you, Kate. And next we'll hear from Phil Sturm.
Thank you again. Time and again, a lot lately, we are faced with unprecedented challenges and crises. And time again, it seems like we are given the same old solutions. They just pencil in a new year, cross out the old year. And we really can't be accepting the way that we have been doing things. It just seems like City Hall is just intent on carrying on with business as it has always carried on. We're dealing with homeless people the same way we've always dealt with homeless people. We're dealing with police brutality the same way we've always dealt with it. And it just doesn't seem like people are getting it, that there's a whole new paradigm in play here and how we're going to govern in the future. And I'm just running because I have a clear passion for service and what service means and what humility in service means and how we need to stop lecturing residents. I'm tired of being lectured by the police chief. I'm tired of being lectured by the mayor. There's so much arrogance at City Hall, and that's what's really driving me to run. And also make sure to donate to the Minneapolis DFL when you're done here. Thanks.
Thank you. And yes, please definitely donate to the Minneapolis DFL so we can keep going. Next, we'll hear from Jacob Fry.
Thank you so much for hosting today, Minneapolis DFL. And to all that are listening, you know this. We have a mandate for change. Intent is important, but this city and indeed this state have been resting on good intention and pretty words for far too long. What this moment demands right now is people with the courage to recognize the reality of these issues and then the clarity and purpose to relentlessly pursue progress wherever we can. And we must also recognize that some of the most meaningful changes, those that have been placed by the state or federal government up on a shelf, hidden away blindly to the outside, out of our reach, and are seemingly out of our reach, are now at our fingertips. So let's have the dialogue. Let's chart a course, but let's not trade this opportunity for transformational change for the theoretical. Black residents are eyeing this moment with well-earned skepticism. They're waiting for that old pattern to play out, which is tragedy, outrage, big promises, and little results. The only way we avoid that fate is by being specific about the changes we want to see, by dedicating ourselves to serious policymaking and dislodging objects that previously we considered immovable. So we're not interested in white papers on economic inclusion. We're not interested in action unless it truly is inclusive in every form. Whatever the consequences or the audience, you have my word, I'll tell you the truth. I won't minimize the challenges to achieving progress. I'll continue being a principled leader guiding this city, not just better times, but to a fundamentally more just Minneapolis.
Thank you, Jacob. Next, we'll hear from AJ Awad.
Thank you very much. Along the lines of what Phil said, and I have to quote the late Vice President Mondale, if you are sure you understand everything that is going on, you are hopelessly confused. And I have to share the same sentiment with Phil in this regard that I personally lost confidence in our elected officials. I think many in community have lost confidence in our elected officials. If we are going to meet this moment, we're going to have to understand that we need a clear new start. We need a fresh new start, and we need someone to come in that's going to hopefully inspire everyone to come together, because ultimately that's the only thing that matters. Minneapolis needs and honestly deserves real leadership and a real champion for all communities, right? Someone who can compassionately, honestly mediate these challenges that our city is going to really face. I believe that I'm that candidate, Minneapolis DFL. I would hope that you give me the opportunity to prove it to you. And honestly, with your endorsement and your support, I know we will build back better, stronger, and honestly, and finally, and hopefully together. So with that, I say thank you, and I'm looking forward to speaking with all the other candidates on the campaign trail, as well as residents and neighbors throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. Next, we'll hear from Jerrell Perry.
All right. Well, I want to thank the Minneapolis DFL for giving us this opportunity. Thank you to all the groups that submitted the questions. Thank you to all the candidates for coming and sharing your ideas, having this forum. It's been awesome. COVID-19, we've dealt with that this past year. An invisible disease, okay? Invisible virus. We came together, brought the best people from around the world, the best doctors, nurses, scientists. We partnered with community for trials and stuff to get this vaccine rolled out. We figured out how to defeat something we cannot see in less than a year. Something we cannot see. And yet we are grappling with what to do with public safety in the same amount of time. Humans are so resilient. We are so creative. If we say that we cannot do anything with the police, if we start there, people will give up all hope. The sky has to be the limit. We have to let community come together, get creative, let the leaders here come together, get creative, share ideas. We can figure this out. We're making it a lot more harder and a lot more complex than it has to be. We can do this. And as AJ said, we have to have new leadership. All trust has been lost. We have to have new leadership. I would love your vote. First, second, or third choice. First would be preferable, but any of them would be appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you. And our last speaker will be Sheila Najjad, and then we will be closing out.
Wonderful, thank you. So my campaign is called Sheila for the People, because I want elected officials who make it easier for everyday people to get involved in the decisions that affect our lives. And throughout this forum, you all, thank you, Minneapolis DFL. I can't help but recall James Baldwin's words, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." I understand the job of mayor. I've been leading community solutions to police violence and building real safety for years. I was one of the lead organizers on the People's Budget, a roadmap to building safety beyond policing, endorsed by over 72 organizations and small businesses in Minneapolis. I'm ready to step into the mayor's office with a plan to create real public safety, stand up to the police federation, and make sure that when we mean change for everyone. This moment is a call to action, and the people of Minneapolis are ready. I was on the streets last week. The people of Minneapolis, the people of the Twin Cities are fearless right now. And it's up to us to meet this moment with real change. We can build a city where everyone who wants to live here can afford to do so, where Black life is treated as precious, and safety means safety for everyone. To get there, we need a mayor who is connected to what's happening on the ground, is accountable to the people, and has the policy knowledge to make smart changes. So from the streets to the spreadsheets, I hope you can join me. Volunteer, donate, vote, SheilaForThePeople.com. I am looking forward to talking to so many of you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. And I'm going to turn this back over to Erin to close us out. And thank you to all the candidates.
Yeah, I second that.
Thank you for moderating, Brianna.
Thanks to all the candidates for the fantastic responses. I wish you all the best of luck in your campaigns. To the audience, do not forget to register for the caucuses. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Caucus.Minneapolis.